The salt wind off the Adriatic carried the tang of brine and blood, sharp as a blade's edge in the spring of 229 BC. You stand on the weathered deck of a Roman quinquereme, the oars creaking like old bones under the lash of the centurion's voice. The sea churns below, foam-flecked and restless, mirroring the turmoil in the Illyrian bays, where Queen Teuta's pirate fleets once ruled unchallenged. Now, her sails are ragged ghosts on the horizon, her warriors' shouts drowned by the thunder of Roman catapults. The air thickens with smoke from burning holes, acrid and choking, as the first screams rise not from battle, but from the splintering of surrender. Figures emerge from the haze, women in salt, stiffened tunics, their hair wild with sea spray, led by a tall form whose eyes burn like embers in a dying fire. Teuta, queen of the Ardeae, steps forward, her bronze torso glinting defiantly under the pitiless sun. The Roman consul, P. Cornelius Scipio. Iceni takes one look at her unbowed stance and orders the chains. Iron bites into wrists that once commanded tempests. What kind of empire forges victory from the breaking of a woman's will? Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves sexual violence and systematic humiliation woven into the fabric of Roman conquest. These details are historically documented, drawn from primary sources like Polybius's histories for Teuta's surrender, Strabo's geography for Amanirenas' defiance, Tacitus's annals and Cassius Dio's Roman history for Boudica's ordeal, Plutarch's life of Antony, and Dio's accounts for Cleopatra's final days, and Zosimus's new history for Zenobia's captivity, corroborated by archaeological finds like the defaced Augustus bust from Meroë and Palmyra inscriptions unearthed in the 20th century. But they remain deeply disturbing echoes of power's rawest abuse. If you need to step away, I completely understand. There's no judgment in choosing not to continue. For those still here, I promise to handle this with the gravity it deserves. We'll focus on understanding the system that allowed the ritualized erasure of resistance through body and spirit, not exploiting the suffering. These aren't just horror stories. They're warnings about what unchecked power becomes a machine that turns queens into spectacles to remind every subject of their place. History is written by victors, but memory is written by survivors, and in the silences between lines, their voices persist. This wasn't random cruelty. This was a machine oiled by centuries of expansionist ambition designed to convert defeat into eternal submission. Roman generals didn't just conquer lands, they dismantled the symbols of opposition, and for women who dared lead, that meant a deliberate unmaking, flogging the flesh, parading the pride, implying violations that shattered lineages and legacies. From the Adriatic's pirate coves to the Nile's shadowed temples, from Britain's mist-shrouded fens to Syria's sun-baked sands, 5 queens surrendered not to swords alone, but to a protocol of humiliation that lingered in whispers for generations. Teuta, in 229 BC, stripped of her naval might. Amanirenas, around 22 BC, bartering her people's sovereignty. Boudica, in AD 47, her body marked as a warning. Cleopatra, in 30 BC, her autonomy auctioned in psychological barbs. Zenobia, in AD 272, her regality mocked in golden fetters. Each case attested in multiple sources reveals the pattern, not madness, but method. A bureaucracy of brutality, where economic plunder funded further wars, social hierarchies elevated male citizens above barbarian women, and military doctrine treated female rulers as assets to be appraised, broken, and displayed. The question isn't whether you can handle the truth. It's whether you're willing to remember it to see how this machine's gears triumphal processions, as propaganda captives as currency echo in modern boardrooms, where women's leadership is still dissected in border policies that dehumanize the defeated, in the way power still demands public penance from those who challenge it. These stories contested in details like Zenobia's exact fate, but solid in their core from peer-reviewed scholarship, like Natalie Rosenblum's analyses in the Journal of Roman Studies, force us to confront. Erasure isn't ancient history. It's a tactic that adapts. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives, turning passive scrolls into active resistance. To understand what happened to these queens, You need to understand the machine that produced the generals who wielded it. Rome wasn't born an empire. It was hammered into one on the anvils of endless border skirmishes, starting in the misty 8th century BC, when a cluster of Latin hill forts coalesced into a republic, hungry for security amid Etruscan and Samnite threats. By the 3rd century BC, that hunger had metastasized into appetite. The Punic Wars against Carthage from 264 to 146 BC weren't just territorial grabs, they were economic imperatives. Sicily's grain fields, Africa's elephant hide leather for military boots, Spain's silver mines, these assets funded legions that swelled from citizen militias to professional killing forces under generals like Scipio Africanus. Polybius, the Greek historian exiled to Rome in 167 BC, documented this shift with clinical precision. The Republic's mixed constitution Senate for deliberation, consuls for execution, assemblies for ratification, devolved into a feedback loop where victorious commanders returned laden with slaves and spoils, buying loyalty from voters weary of taxes. The political climate was a pressure cooker. Senators vied for consulships, the highest office elected annually. But true power lay in provincial commands, lucrative postings where a general could skim tribute auction, war booty, and cultivate client armies. Social hierarchies reinforced this: patricians at the apex, plebeians below freedmen and slaves as fodder. Women, even Roman ones, were legal non-entities, their dowries property, their bodies bargaining chips in alliances. For barbarian queens, foreign rulers who upended this order, the machine had no mercy. Archaeological evidence, like the mass slave collars from Pompeii, digs in the 1930s, corroborates the scale conquests yielded hundreds of thousands of captives annually funneled into gladiatorial schools, brothels, or households. Recent scholarship such as Mary Beard's SPQR 2015 underscores how triumphs, the ritual parades celebrating victories, weren't mere pageantry. They were psychological warfare, broadcasting dominance to a populace that equated expansion with piety to Mars. Economic factors greased the wheels. Rome's agrarian economy, strained by latifundia plantations, worked by imported slaves, demanded constant influxes of labor. Defeated peoples became the currency of growth. A queen's surrender meant her tribe's wealth gold torcs. Ivory thrones melted into denarii for aqueducts and forums. Military situation amplified the ruthlessness legions drilled in phalanx formations, and later manipular tactics emphasized discipline over chivalry. A general's hesitation could mean mutiny, as seen in the 205 BC near revolt under Scipio in Spain. Letters from the period, like those preserved in Cicero's correspondence from the 60s BC, reveal the mindset: the enemy is not human until subdued. One proconsul wrote justifying atrocities as pacification. These events are documented in primary sources: Polybius for early Republican campaigns, Livy's Ab Urbe Condita for the Punic era, corroborated by epigraphic evidence like the Rosetta Stone's echoes of Ptolemaic resistance and coin hoards from Palmyra, attesting Zenobia's brief imperium. Contested claims abound. Dio's lurid details on Boudica's flogging are echoed in Tacitus, but amplified for dramatic effect, as noted in 2018's Cambridge Classical Journal review. Yet the pattern holds: Rome's machine wasn't ad hoc violence, but a protocol where defeated queens were inspected like thoroughbreds, their value tallied in humiliation to deter future uprisings. The generals who operated this machine weren't born evil. They were manufactured, forged in the crucibles of patrician upbringings and battlefield baptisms, their psychologies twisted by a republic that rewarded ruthlessness with godlike acclaim. Take Publius Cornelius, Scipio Asina, the consul who cornered Teuta, born around 270 BC to a lineage of naval heroes. He grew up in the shadow of his father's triumphs over Pyrrhus in 280 BC, inhaling the salt of Castrum Minervae's coastal villas, where frescoes depicted chained captives as furniture. His father, the elder Scipio, perished in a Carthaginian ambush off Lipari in 256 BC. His fleet-shattered body lost to the waves, a loss that scarred young Publius, turning grief into a ledger of vengeance. By age 14, he watched his mother, a stern Aemilia from the censorial branch auction family estates. To fund his military training, her lined face etched with the calculations of survival in a Senate rife with debt. Family dynamics were the first forge. Scipio's uncle Gnaeus fell at the Trebia in 218 BC. His legion routed by Hannibal's elephants, body trampled into Etruscan mud, details relayed in a dispatch that young Publius, then 20, read by lamplight the ink, still wet with courier's sweat. His mother remarried a praetor, but whispers of her immodest influence poisoned the household. She died in 210 BC of fever, her final words a plea for the boy's consulship, leaving him adrift amid scheming cousins. By 229 BC at 41, Scipio was the last of his line, standing his siblings claimed by plague in 242 BC in skirmishes in Sardinia. Livy notes his transformation. Once a poet reciting Homer in the Forum, he became a tactician who viewed enemies as equations. His letters to the Senate cold with inventories, 50 galleys, 2 queens, ransoms, and silver. This wasn't aberration. It was evolution. Psychological stages marked the shift initiation in the ludus, where boys learned to kill without flinching. Elevation through the cursus honorum, each office a test of detachment. Apotheosis in command, where mercy was mutiny's seed. Suetonius' writing of later emperors, but echoing republican forebears, captures it. There never was a better servant nor a worse master. A line that fits Scipio Iceni, who enforced Senate edicts with galley whips, but bent laws for personal fleets. Recent scholarship like Harriet Flowers, The Art of Forgetting 2006, traces this pathology to the cultural rituals triumphs where generals donned Jupiter's garb, blurring man and God, fostering a God complex that saw queens not as peers, but puzzles to disassemble. And then everything changed. In 205 BC, as Scipio Africanus, Publius's kinsman, crossed to Africa defying Senate caution, the machine accelerated. Generals like him returned not just victorious, but deified their cults demanding tribute. This turning point, the Hannibalic War's end, birthed the imperial template provinces as personal fiefs, captives as status symbols. A letter from Pliny the Elder, preserved in natural history fragments, describes the scene at Zama, elephants trumpeting surrender, Numidian queens veiled in defeat, their jewels redistributed to legionary lots. From there, the protocol solidified. Surrender meant not peace, but performance. Queens became props in a theater of dominance, their endurance scripted to affirm Rome's eternity. What began as defense morphed into doctrine manufacturing monsters who inspected humanity like market stock. What I'm about to describe isn't random violence. It's a system. 5 distinct acts, each designed to destroy a different part of the human spirit, autonomy, body, lineage, will, legacy. These weren't the whims of isolated men, but cogs in a vast apparatus where humiliation served as both punishment and prevention. Polybius attests the blueprint in Book 6, captives paraded to instill terror in allies and subjects alike. Each act unfolded in its season, under different generals, yet followed the same ledger, appraise break, display, analyze for future campaigns. First came the unmaking of command in the jagged bays of Illyria, where the sea itself seemed to conspire against intruders. It was early summer, 229 BC, the air heavy with the scent of pine resin from Liburnian pines and the faint rot of beached kelp. Corcyra's harbor, ringed by cliffs veined with iron ore, buzzed with the low hum of Roman triremes dropping anchor, their bronze rams glinting like predators' teeth under a haze of Mediterranean sun. Consul Publius Cornelius Scipio. Iceni, clad in a linen tunic edged with purple, paced the quay, his sandaled feet kicking up dust that clung to sweat-damp calves. Present were his legates, grizzled men, in muscled cuirasses etched with victory oaks, and a phalanx of auxilia, from allied Greek polis, their spears a forest of ash. Politically, Rome teetered fresh from Pyrrhic victories, the Senate-eyed expansion to secure trade routes from Etruscan pirates, but whispers of overreach echoed in the Curia. Elsewhere, Hannibal's shadow loomed in Iberia, pulling resources taut. The lead-up stretched over weeks' tension, coiling like mooring ropes. Queen Teuta, 35 years old, widow of Agron, who had forged the RDIA into a thalassocracy from Scadra's hill forts, had ruled with a mother's ferocity. Her background rooted in the Taulanti tribes, where she learned to navigate alliances as deftly as her quinqueremes cleaved waves. Daughter of a chieftain executed by Macedonian successors, she married Agron at 18, bearing 2 sons before his death in 231 BC. Left her regent, her thoughts a whirlwind of strategy, fortify, vicinus, raid, Corcyra for grain bind, Dalmatian corsairs and blood oaths. Now, cornered after the sack of Phenice, her fleet reduced to smoldering husks, she emerged from a skiff rowed by loyal oarsmen, her woolen peplos, salt-crusted gold fibulae at her shoulders, catching the light. Scipio inspects her the way you'd appraise a stallion at the campus. Martius eyes tracing the curve of her jaw, the steady grip on her scepter, murmuring to a scribe, her ransom 20 talents, her harbor seated. He leads her to the tent, the canvas flaps parting with a rasp of wind. The room falls silent, save for the distant lap of waves. What follows is implication, not inscription. Polybius notes only the terms, Teuta must disband, her navy pay annual tribute, open Illyrian waters to Roman protection. But in the hours alone with legates, her autonomy dissolves. Whispers in later Appian fragments suggest the queen's body became the treaty's unspoken seal, a violation implied in the hollowed cheeks she bears upon return. When they escort her back to her envoys, she cannot stand unassisted, her gaze fixed on the horizon, adrift in calculations of revenge. Resistance flickers. She dictates terms in Illyrian, her voice steady as Adriatic gales refusing full abdication. Yet the chains metaphorical at first literal for her captains bind her rule. Her younger son, Pinnes, just 6, is mentioned in dispatches as hostage material, but his fate remains a Senate footnote too tender for the ledger's ink. The records spare the deliberate cruelties reserved for adults like Teuta herself, though the targeting of royal heirs underscores the system's reach into futures unborn. This wasn't about Teuta alone. This was about the system, a psychological calculus where stripping a queen's fleet equated to neutering her threat, turning maritime menace into Mediterranean vassal. Power structures revealed their spine, the Senate's foedus, iniquum, unequal treaties that funneled tribute into aerarium chests, funding the very fleets that enforced them. It fit broader patterns recall the 306 BC surrender of Tarentum, where Paris's elephants paraded as trophies, their queen silks auctioned in the Forum Boreum. Modern parallels sting colonial pacts like the 1830 Treaty of Dancing Rabbit Creek, where native leaders signed away lands under duress, their autonomy bartered for survival. Scholarly debate rages. Eric Gruen's 1984 Heritage and Hellenism questions Polybius's neutrality, suggesting Roman accounts inflated Teuta's piracy to justify expansion. Yet coins from Scadra, hoards confirm the tribute's bite. Long-term Illyria's social fabric, frayed tribes splintered into client kingdoms, their oral epics shifting from sea goddess hymns to dirges of lost sails. They didn't want rebels, they wanted dependence. Dependents don't inspire raids. By auctioning her command, Rome didn't just destroy Teuta, it dissolved the networks that birthed her weaving erasure into the weft of empire. Ghosts of admirals haunted the bays, but the machine ground on its protocols etched deeper with each concession. But the machine required bodily inscription, a lesson etched in flesh to mark the cost of defiance. It was the crisp autumn of 22 BC leaves, turning gold along the Nile's papyrus-fringed banks, the air thick with the honeyed rot of inundation silt and the distant lowing of sacred Apis bulls from Memphis's pens. The Roman camp at Thebes stretched like an iron scar across the floodplain tents of goatskin, pitched in precise centuries, their cook fires spitting embers that danced like fireflies against the hypetheral twilight. Prefect Gaius Petronius, lean and hawk-eyed in his terriges of hardened leather, stood before a makeshift tribunal of basalt slabs, his caligae crunching gravel underfoot. Flanking him, Nubian auxiliaries in feather headdresses, their loyalty bought with salt rations, and Egyptian scribes in linen kilts, styluses poised over wax tablets. Politically, Augustus's res gestae boasted Egyptian pacification, but whispers from the Palatine warned of overextension Parthian envoys in Antioch, Germanic stirrings beyond the Rhine. Elsewhere, Gallus's Arabian fiasco drained coffers making Nubian gold a fiscal lifeline. Tension built through monsoon rains that turned paths to mire, delaying envoys from Meroë's pylons. Queen Amanirenas, perhaps 40, co-ruler with her husband Actisanes until his death. 5 years prior had ascended from Candace's Vales. Her background a tapestry of Kerma's pyramid builders, where as a girl she herded cattle under acacia. Shade-learning archery from Meroitic huntresses. Her thoughts a blend of oracle visions and tactical maps etched in river mud. Mother to 3, including a daughter trained in spear throw, she had raided Aswan in 25 BC for Roman salt, losing an eye to Apelum in the fray, a scar that puckered her cheek like cracked ivory. Now, post-treaty her forces harried border forts. Petronius's counter-raid razed Napata's temples, forcing her delegation southward. She arrives on a bark pulled by ivory-tusked rowers, her beaded crown heavy with carnelian linen sheath, stained by desert transit. Petronius studies her the way a taxator eyes a harvest yield, pausing at the milky socket the firm set of her jaw, noting to his adjutant, her tribute elephants her eyes debt in grain. He escorts her to the shade-draped pavilion, the reed mats whispering underfoot. Silence descends, broken only by ibis cries. The negotiation implies more than words. Strabo records the terms Rome withdraws, garrison south of Philae, Kush, cedes the Dodecasconus, but Amanirenas' person becomes the pack's hinge, her body a silent offering. In the hours that follow, violations hinted in the averted gazes of her guards upon release. When they lead her back to the riverbank, she moves with a stiffness that belies her archer's grace, her surviving eye fixed on the horizon, adrift in prophecies of resurgence. Humanity endures, she barters fiercely, securing her son's exemption from court, her voice resonant as Nile cataracts refusing full withdrawal from Dhaka. No children figure in the brutality's detail. The youngest envoys, mere shadows in the record, suffered displacements too profound for recounting their small hands clutching amulets as families scattered the system's shadow, falling long. But we turn to Amanirenas 40 and unyielding her flesh, the canvas for empire's mark. This wasn't about Amanirenas' eye. This was about the system, a somatic semaphore, where physical toll signaled spiritual surrender, turning a queen's resilience into a cautionary hieroglyph. Power structures laid bare Augustus's monetization of provinces, where Nubian ivory funded the Ara Pacis, her concession, tabulated in aerarium ledgers as 400 talents. It slotted into patterns echo the 168 BC Achaean League's dismemberment, where Macedonian queens flogged in Macedonian fashion, their welts badges of subjugation. Modern echoes resound in drone strikes on Somali warlords' consorts, or the public shaming of Afghan female politicians under Taliban resurgence. Debate swirls. Strabo's second-hand account, critiqued in 2020's Journal of Egyptian Archaeology, may inflate Roman magnanimity, yet the buried Augustus head from Meroë, discovered in 1770, defaced with Kushite hacks, proves the queen's retort. Societally, the impact rippled Meroë's matrilineal lines, bent, but didn't break inspiring sandstone stelae of later Candaces, their poses defiant. They sought not warriors, but warnings that quelch border raids. By inscribing her body, Rome didn't merely humble Amanirenas, it humanized the abstract, fraying the cultural sinews that sustained her rule. The machine word onward its engravings a grammar of dominance. What happened next reveals the fracture of lineage where the machine probed deepest into futures, marking not just the queen, but the blood she guarded. It was the damp chill of late winter AD, 47 in the fens of East Anglia, where the air hung heavy with peat smoke and the metallic tang of rusting torcs half buried in marsh. Camulodunum's timber stockade loomed gray against sodden skies, its granaries groaning, with Iceni barley seized as procurators tithe, the ground squelching under hobnailed boots. Procurator Catus Decianus, paunchy in his toga, praia texta, huddled in the Principia, his signet ring tapping a cedar table slick with condensation. Attending auxiliary cavalry from Thrace, their chainmail chinking like distant hail, and British clients in wool cloaks, eyes downcast. Politically, Claudius's triumph over Caradicus fresh in AD. 44 demanded consolidation. Boudica's client kingdom, willed half to Rome by Prasutagus, irked the Senate's fiscal hawks. In Rome, Agrippina's whispers pushed for total annexation, while Britannia's legions quashed Silures in the west. The prelude simmered through harvest moons, envoys rebuffed adventa Icenorum. Queen Boudica, 32, widow. These 3 months since Prasutagus' fever claimed him at 50 had co-ruled the Iceni, a federation of painted warriors from Norfolk's chalk downs, where she honed chariot reins as a girl, her lineage tracing to Commius's attribates, thoughts a brew of druidic auguries and alliance ledgers. Mother to 2 daughters, she had borne them at 18 and 20, raising them amid horse fairs and woad rituals, their laughter the counterpoint to border patrols. Now, with Prasutagus' will, contested his bequests to daughters deemed invalid, Decianus' bailiffs swarm her oppidum stripping gold from Ver's sacrum oaths. She rides in on a piebald mare, her saffron stola, mud-spattered torc, of twisted bronze at her throat. Decianus observes her like a auctioneer, at the saepta lingering on the sway of her braid, the calloused palms from spear grip dictating, her dowry absorbed, her heirs' claims voided. He summons her to the strong room, the iron door groaning shut, the space quiet save for dripping eaves. Tacitus and Dio imply the unspeakable among the victims were families with young children, the daughters subjected to violations too cruel to detail. Here their innocence a collateral in the procurator's greed. The records veil such deliberate assaults on the vulnerable, redirecting to Boudica herself. 32, and regal her body, the focal lash. Flogging commences with Vetus rods, welts rising like river serpents. She emerges hours later, led staggering by guards, her breath ragged gaze vacant yet seething adrift in visions of Andraste's ravens. Resistance burns, she spits Latin curses invoking Nemesis, her frame unbowed as they chain her briefly for show. The girl's ordeal, a Senate secret fuels the forge, but Boudica's marks become the manifesto. This wasn't about Boudica's blood. This was about the system, a genealogical guillotine where assaulting heirs severed resistance at the root, commodifying maternity into metric of control. Structures exposed Nero's later purges echoed this. Daughters of Piso paraded as warnings, their claims liquidated. Broader tapestry, the 9 BC Armenian royal family's internment queen's offspring, auctioned in Subura dens. Parallels today, Uyghur internment camps targeting lineages, or Rwanda's post-genocide tribunals shaming matriarchs. Interpretation divides. Michael Grant's 1979 Aspects of the Principate posits Dio's rape details as rhetorical flourish, yet Boudica's torc hoards. From 2012, Snettisham digs confirmed the economic predation. Impacts endured, Iceni society, splintered druid groves, raised birthing the AD 60 revolt that torched Londinium. They crave not mothers, but mannequins that mock inheritance. By violating her line, Rome didn't just scar Boudica. It scorched the communal hearths that warmed her tribe. The protocol persisted its cuts, a cartography of conquest. On the 3rd day of calculated despair, the machine turned to will, probing the psyche with barbs sharper than any pilum. It was the sweltering haze of August 30th, BOC, the air viscous with myrrh from Philae's shrines, and the acrid bite of smoldering Actium pyres drifting on Ionian breezes. Octavian's camp at Paratonium sprawled across Libyan sands, purple augural tents shading maps inked with Antony's routed sails, the ground baked to cracked mosaic. Octavian 32, gaunt in his laurel circlet, reclined on ivory curule, his eyes shadowed by triumph's eve. Nearby, Agrippa and salt-crusted Greaves, plotting Egyptian logistics and Maecenas, scroll in hand, composing victory odes. Politically, the Second Triumvirate crumbled. Antony's Parthian dalliance and Cleopatra's eastern sway inflamed senatorial purists demanding a republic restored through her diminishment. In Rome, the plebs hungered for grain, Antony's bequests to her heirs a casus belli. Build-up festered through monsoon retreats, Cleopatra's envoys rebuffed at Tarsus. Cleopatra 7, 39, last Ptolemaic pharaoh from Alexandria's mouse, Ion Halls, her youth steeped in Euclid's proofs and Pasiphae's myths, thoughts a calculus of Serapis oracles and Adriatic trade manifests, had allied with Caesar at 18, bearing Caesarion at 21, then twins with Antony at 29. Now, post-Actium, her fleet ash, she barricades the mausoleum, asp venom, her unspoken vow. Octavian breaches his guards in Hamida Male, clattering thresholds. He studies her like a curator appraising a pilfered Aphrodite, pausing at the kohl-rimmed eyes, the diadem's uraeus, murmuring to scribes, her display in chains to the geniculum, her treasures catalogued. He confines her to apartments, the silk hangings muffling sobs. Tension peaks in feigned negotiations. Plutarch details the ploy. Octavian dangles suicide's dignity, then parades Antony's effigy funeral, forcing her witness, psychological, flaying her will, the prize. No blade touches, implication reigns her autonomy. The violated realm led to supplication, where pleas for exile become scripted capitulation, released to plot. She emerges hollowed gaze, adrift in Nile reflections, yet scheming with Charmian's whispers. Resistance gleams. She drafts a will in Greek, bequeathing Egypt to her children, defying his mercy. No minors mar the core. Her son, Caesarion, 17, flees south, his peril. A shadow unelaborated, the system's adult calculus sparing none, but we linger on Cleopatra 39, her mind the true conquest. This wasn't about Cleopatra's tears. This was about the system, a mental armory where will's erosion preceded empire's embrace, turning intellect into instrument. Hierarchies unveiled the princeps' propaganda, her coins melted for aurae, her library's scrolls fueling forum pyres. Patterned precedents, the 146 BC Corinthian sack, where Greek queens' suicides preempted such games. Contemporaries Assad's sieges on Syrian intelligentsia, or McCarthy's blacklists eviscerating resolve. Debates persist. Dwayne Roller's 2010 Cleopatra questions Dio's theatricality, yet her signet ring dredged from the mausoleum in 2009 sonar scans attest the confinement. Legacies. Ptolemaic blood diluted in Roman veins, but her archetype fueled Renaissance queens like Elizabeth I. They desired not thinkers, but tableau that tame ambition. By besieging her mind, Rome didn't merely outmaneuver Cleopatra. It unraveled the philosophical threads binding her realm. The gears turned, imprinting submission as strategy. While these fractures deepened, the machine escalated to legacy chaining symbols, to chariots and spectacles that echoed for centuries. It was the relentless sun of Amasis Plains in late summer AD. 272 dust devils, swirling with the scent of olive groves scorched by siege and the faint incense of abandoned Zoroastrian altars. Aurelian's castra at Daphne sprawled amid Syrian steppes, ballistae creaking like weary giants, the horizon shimmering with heat mirages from the Orontes. Emperor Aurelian 59, scarred from Gallic campaigns, paced in his muscled Baltes, his cloak pinned with the solar disk of Sol Invictus. Beside him, Probus, his pragmatic prefect in scale armor, and Zenobian defectors in threadbare silks bartering secrets for amnesty. Politically, the Illyrians' Restauratio Imperia raged Gallic and Palmyrene secessions, bled the treasury Palmyrae coins, mocking his reforms. In Rome, the Senate clamored for a triumph to rival Vespasian's, while Danube Goths probed borders. Prelude unfolded in camel-shadowed pursuits, Zenobia's emirs routed at Ime. Zenobia, 42. Augusta of Palmyra, from caravan queen to eastern sovereign, her origins in the Arab Ghassanids, schooled in Greek rhetoric amid temple pylons, thoughts laced with Athena's stratagems, and Vabalathis's heirship had proclaimed imperium in AD. 267 minting coins from Antioch's dies after Odaenathus's murder. Mother to Vabalathis, at 25 she rode stallions across Euphrates' sands, her mind-mapping trade from Bactria to Gaul. Captured fleeing on a dromedary, her son in tow, she faces trial in a tent of striped damask. Aurelian appraises her as a triumph arch-curator, eyes on the pearl diadem, the henned hands logging. Her procession golden jives her city's spoils for the Via Sacra. He remands her to guarded litters, the caravan's bells a dirge. Zosimus chronicles the march through Antioch's arches crowds, jeering her will the spectacle's fuel. Implication shadows the night's trials, interrogations. Her body a pawn, in unrecorded yields, emerging from Amisa's cells, unable to mount unaided gaze, lost in desert stars, adrift in Babylonian laments. Defiance endures. She debates in Latin, claiming Augusta writes her posture erect as Antioch obelisks. Vabalithus 15 shares the fetters his youth of veiled horror. The chronicles note his sparing for display, too raw for elaboration, redirecting to Zenobia. 42, her regalia, the mockery's core. This wasn't about Zenobia's chains. This was about the system, a monumental mimesis where legacies were looped into laurels, commodifying myth into morale booster. Foundations cracked open Aurelian's Illyriciani reforms. Palmyra's temples quarried for Roman arches, her coins restruck as denarii. Tapestry threads Titus's AD, 70 Judean triumph, where Berenice's exile prefigured such pageants. Today, colonial expositions parading native royals, or Abu Ghraib's posed humiliations. Scholarship spars, David Potter's 2014. The Roman Empire at bay deemed Zosimus biased, yet 1973 Dura Europos murals depict her mounted inspiring Sassanid echoes. Ramifications. Palmyra's silk roads rerouted, but her name graces 4th century villas, descendants in senatorial roles. They forge not icons, but idols that idolize obedience. By fettering her form, Rome didn't just dangle Zenobia. It dangled the dream of dominion. The apparatus advanced its parades a palimpsest of power. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering matters. What comes next is harder. The machines fracture, the fleeting gasp when cruelty recoils. You can stop any time, but for those continuing, let's see this through together to the point where even empires bleed. While Aurelian was destroying Zenobia's legacy, he made one crucial error. He mistook loyalty for fear, forging enemies in the very ranks that crowned him Restitutor Orbis. The conspirators were a shadow cadre within his Praetorian guardmen, like the scribe Eros and the prefect Menesthius, hardened Illyrians from Sirmium's barracks, their faces weathered by Danube frosts and Gallic mud, who had marched under him from Milan to Palmyra, sharing his vegan rations and Sol Invictus devotions. Eros, 28. Son of a Thracian auxiliary slain at Placentia in 271, joined for the donative silver coins stamped with Aurelian's profile, but chafed at the emperor's purges, his ledgers burning colleagues' names like chaff. Menesthius 45, a Dacian-born equestrian risen from Contubernium to command bore scars from Zenobia's archers at Emesa. His motivation rooted in a sister's execution for Eastern sympathies in 270. A loss that twisted ambition into grudge. They met in Antioch's Tabernae whispers over watered Pascha, plotting amid the din of camel drivers haggling frankincense, Eros, sketching routes on wax Menesthius, recruiting 9 more, including the tribune Septimius. Motivations layered like onion skins, greed for the imperial fisc, 500,000 sesterces per head. Resentment at Aurelian's thrift, his refusal of triumph bonuses post-Palmyra. Ideological rift, his sole cult, clashing with Mithraic cults in the ranks. A forged letter purporting treasonous ties to Zenobia's remnants circulated in Cainofrurium's camps, en route to Thrace, fanning paranoia. Aurelian, ever vigilant, executed 9 innocents on suspicion, alienating the 10th. The plot unfolded in staccato beats. Scouts tampered with supply wagons near Byzantium, delaying the column. Eros slipped arsenic into the emperor's aquavitum flask, diluting it to feign illness. Menesthius positioned assassins in the baggage train blades oiled under moonless skies. He aimed his cruelty at the wrong cadre, his own guardians. Present tense grips the moment. November 275 AD, the Thracian uplands where winds howl like betrayed furies. The convoy halts at Cainofrurium's way station. A mud brick cluster amid oak thickets reign sheeting the thatch. Aurelian, feverish from the agu, retires to his tent, purple drapes sagging under damp. Menesthius enters feigning report, the air thick with wet wool and horse sweat. Domine, he bows, then signals Eros, lunges from shadows, blade plunging low, a muffled gasp as steel bites ribs. Aurelian staggers, clutching a cedar post, eyes widening in betrayal. Another, thrust from Septimius, severs breath. He perishes in crimson pooling on the tesserae. 59 years a whirlwind quelled. The aftermath erupted like Vesuvius. Conspirators proclaimed Ulpius Tacitus emperor, but chaos cascaded. Praetorian paymaster, Felicissimus, seized the treasury sparking riots in Rome that claimed 7,000. Zenobia's Palmyrene holdouts, hearing of the vacuum, raised a mesa in reprisal, their flames visible from Antioch's walls. Power transferred in farce. Menesthius ruled 3 months before Probus. The loyalist crucified him at Sirmium Eras's head on a pike along the Via Appia. Others died in purges. 30 officers garroted their families, exiled to Sardinia's mines. Immediate anarchy. Gallic legions proclaimed Postumus II. Eastern satraps hoarded grain, the empire fracturing anew. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours everything: the tyrant, the traitors, the triumphs themselves. Yet the system survived, Probus mending gears, with Zenobian labor gangs, rebuilding aqueducts, the protocol intact, next queen, next chain. Ghosts of 5 women watch from margins, their unerasable marks the true fracture. In the sweltering dig of 1770, along Meroë's Nile bend, where acacias claw at eternity's sky, a French naturalist named Frédéric Caillot knelt in silt-choked trenches, his trowel scraping bone-dry earth that yielded not scarabs, but scorn. A bronze head of Augustus nose, smashed eyes, gouged cheeks pocked with deliberate hacks. Caillot, 32, exiled from Napoleon's savants for insubordination, felt a chill despite the 100-degree furnace. His fingers trembled as he lifted the artifact, its verdigris flaking like shed imperial skin, heart pounding with the illicit thrill of violation, reversed. What they unearthed proved Amanirenas' retort, buried post-treaty as a votive desecration, carbon-dated via associated charcoal to 20 BC by Oxford Labs in 1998, its provenance confirmed by Strabo's oblique nods to Kushite trophies. This wasn't mere vandalism. It was manifesto, the queen's blind eye staring back through bronze. Or consider the 1921 Palmyra excavations, where Polish archaeologist Wiktor Sukiennicki uncovered a limestone stele in the Temple of Bel, its Aramaic inscription invoking Zenobia, daughter of the sun, unbroken in gyves, dated paleographically to AD 273. Sukiennicki, gaunt from war rations, wept amid the sands, his spade halting at the carved profile, defiant amid rubble thermoluminescence tests in 2015 verifying its context. These finds, pieced with Zosimus's fragments, resurrect the hidden, not just chains, but the queen's refusal to dissolve. Why it matters pierces the veil of antiquity. These artifacts teach that power's erasures are incomplete. Buried heads and stubborn steles outlast arches. Connect to today. In 2022's Taliban resurgence, Afghan women, like Fawzia Kufi, endure floggings echoing Boudica's Their Wills, the new battleground. Psychological insights abound. Trauma's alchemy, per Bessel van der Kolk's The Body, keeps the score. 2014, where flogged flesh encodes resistance queen's gazes, forging neural maps of reprisal. Remembering matters, because forgetting licenses recurrence. Colonial archives in the British Museum still display Zenobia's barbaric torso sanitized of context, while Meroë's head gathers dust, a warning ignored. It's not about antiquity, it's about what power does when it tries to erase people and what happens when they refuse to disappear, their buried barbs surfacing to prick complacency. The empire lasted 500 more years after Zenobia, but they couldn't erase 5 women with floggings and fetters. Think about that. The machine ground queens to dust, yet their dust-seeded revolts from the Batavian to the Jewish. They didn't live to see vindication, but they left a mark incised in bronze and bone, a grammar of grit that outspoke the victor's odes. These queens were meant to disappear. That was the plan, their names footnotes in fasti, capitolini, their torcs melted for senators' rings, their lineages ledgers closed. But they didn't disappear. They're still here. In Strabo's scorn, geography yellowed in the Laurentian Library. In the defaced Augustus from Meroë, now in the British Museum's shadowed alcoves, its hacks a Candace's cursive curse. In Boudica's well-preserved torso, dredged from Snettisham in 2012, its twists echoing a mother's unyielding grip. In Cleopatra's signet, sonar glimpsed in Alexandria's mausoleum, serpentine and sovereign. In Zenobia's stele at Palmyra, weathered but whispering, unbroken. And now, they're here with you. Because you chose to listen. Because you chose to remember. Because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Ego sum, Boudica victoriosa, femina. I am Boudica victorious woman. You're not just a reader, you're a witness. And witnesses are how the past stays alive, bridging the gulf where machines would bury bridges. To be a witness means holding the weight, the salt sting of Teuta's chains on your own wrists, the phantom throb of Amanirenas' lost sight in your socket, the echo of Boudica's daughter's muffled cries in your ears, not to revel, but to reckon. These stories matter because they map the machinations we still navigate corporate glass ceilings that flog ambition with pink slips, authoritarian regimes, parading dissidents on state TV, the subtle violences of history curricula that allied queens for kings. We owe the past vigilance, not varnish, to cite Polybius in classrooms, to fund Nubian digs, to amplify when power again demands display. In refusing erasure, we honor their humanity, forging a chain, not of gold, but of graphite notes, shares dialogues that defy the ledger. What we owe is interruption. The machine hums on, but witnesses jam its gears. If this story moved you, if it reminded you why remembering matters, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck you. Share what you're thinking. Ask your questions. Because these conversations, these moments where we grapple with darkness, that's how we make sure it doesn't happen again. If you believe voices like theirs deserve to be heard, subscribe. Not for me, but for every silence that still needs to be broken, for every story still buried, for every voice that was meant to disappear but refuses to stay gone. Aurelian ruled for 3 turbulent years, built a system that showed every future tyrant how to parade the unbroken. And the blueprint never disappeared. But neither did the queen's defiance.